So myself and Dave Wisner, who's out today, but we're going to be teaching this class, as you all know, over the next couple of weeks. Not on Celebration Sunday. We'll take that day off on November 9th, but we'll run all the way up through the end of Ordinary Time, right before Advent begins. Hey, Rachel. Yeah. And so there's a lot that I want to say. This is, as you might expect, something that's really near and dear to my heart, is helping people understand what this thing called the Episcopal Church is, especially because I did not grow up in it. It was not my religious background at all. I think, as some of you know, I was raised in the Southern Baptist tradition. So in many ways, at least within Protestantism, about as different from the Episcopal Church as you can imagine. Obviously, we know the Episcopal Church is liturgical, right? Meaning that we follow a set pattern and we say the same things out loud at the same times. That doesn't happen in the Baptist Church. There's much more sort of freedom, and things can be much more loose in terms of the way. We were talking about this at convention over the weekend, that the Episcopal Church has gifts to offer the church at large. And I believe that every tradition and denomination has some kind of gift to offer to the wider Christian church. And so the Baptist Church has that gift of sort of spontaneity and intimacy, I think, to offer to the church at large. We have our own gifts, and there's a reason that I'm a happy Episcopalian now as well. So you don't have to share a lot, but I'm just curious, we can just do a show of hands. How many of you all come from the Episcopal Church? Okay, all right, a handful, okay. Most parishes in the Episcopal Church today that are growing and thriving are full of people who did not grow up in the Episcopal Church. So there's been a generational shift, a generational turnover in terms of the adherents of the Episcopal Church. And in large part, where we see growth, it has happened because of folks coming from other Christian denominations or from outside the church entirely. Both of which I would say are really positive, The first, some people might say, is not positive because you're just kind of turning over the same folks. But if people find new life, new vitality, new expression of their own faith in Christ within the Episcopal Church, that is awesome. Like, I'm all in for that. And so, likewise, if someone comes to me and says, I don't know, I want to be Pentecostal now. I want to do this. I would bless them and say, go with God. Like, wherever the Spirit is moving in your life, that's where you need to be. So, anyway, all that is to say, I'm really happy to welcome people into the Episcopal Church. So the other thing to say is we also are getting folks who are completely outside of Christianity or faith altogether. And the Episcopal Church is not really known for quote-unquote evangelism, but I think we've done a great job in what we are good at, which is something we call public witness. The Episcopal Church used to be kind of like a default state church in the United States. Many of the founding fathers were Episcopalian, and I think really up until the 1950s, in a lot of places, the Episcopal Church would have been sort of the place in town where the movers and shakers ended up. That's not the case anymore. We've lost a great deal of our social cachet. No one really cares what the presiding bishop of the Episcopal Church has to say about anything on a national or international scale. Nevertheless, when people find out, and when we do sort of get those media moments, I feel like we got one with Bishop Buddy, last year. We get these media moments every now and then where people are kind of alerted to and awakened to whatever it is that we are, and they come and check us out. And that's been, I think, a really positive thing as well. So I just want to talk generally a little bit today about the Episcopal Church, sort of what it is, where it came from a little bit as well. And then really over the next 4 weeks, we're going to be talking about what it means to be a Christian in the Episcopal Church, in the Episcopal way. So even talking about some of the basics like prayer and scripture and what these things actually mean within the Episcopal tradition. But sort of to kick things off, like I said, we'll talk a little bit about how we got from there to now. The official name of the Episcopal Church for many years was the Domestic and Foreign Missionary Society, the Protestant Episcopal Church, or, the DAFMSOTPEC, which does not roll off the tongue. So I'm glad that a couple of years ago we decided to change this to the Episcopal Church. The background of the Episcopal Church, you can really talk about it in one of two ways. The sort of larger narrative, you could talk about Catholic Christianity growing up out of the 4th century and Constantine's conversion to Christianity and the spread of Christianity within the Roman Empire, which of course included Britain. And so you can talk about a Christianity of Britain, and you can tie it to sort of the way in which the English church grows as English itself sort of grows as a language and as a culture within those centuries. You can also talk about it much more specifically, though, as the Church of England in the colonies. So that's what the Episcopal Church was. It was the Church of England transplanted to the colonies. So when English colonists came over, they started churches. They were not called Episcopal churches. They were Anglican churches. They were Church of England. Remember, at that time, especially in the 1600s, when the colonists first started coming over, the English church itself was still very new. It had grown in the 16th century and the 1500s out of the Protestant Reformation. However, right, it did try to compromise and maintain a sort of middle way between some of the more extreme factions at the time, because England went through its own civil war, and it was mainly over Anglicanism, and it was really, really terrible, as all wars are. So, and so we have then these colonists. They come over, they worship in the way that they're accustomed to. They have bishops, they have the system as well. You have sort of the established church in places like Virginia, and then you have Puritans up in Massachusetts who wanted to purify the Church of England of all of its popery. So their worship looks different than, say, an Episcopal or Anglican church would have looked like in in Virginia, or a place like that. But for the most part, the Episcopal Church grows out of that sort of settled colonial Anglicanism. Okay, we have a revolution, right? 1776 to roughly 1789, when the Constitution is finally adopted. Of course, within the Anglican churches in the United States, there were loyalists, people who wanted to stay loyal to King George III, and there were people who were patriots, who wanted to split and form the United States of America. Some of this is in Hamilton. So if you know the history through the lens of Hamilton, you know some of this. And the first bishop of the Episcopal Church, Samuel Seabury, shows up in Hamilton. There, of course, he's a bad guy, but I'll get to that story a little bit later. So we have a revolution. We can't call ourselves the Church of England anymore. That's a bit problematic at this point. And so when looking for a name, these colonists, who again are largely worshiping in the same way, the only difference at first is that they take out the prayers for King George III, and they replace them with prayers for the President, Continental Congress, and those sorts of entities. But of course, they can't support King George III in the prayers of the people. But the worship looks largely the same. And so then the church is founded as the Domestic and Foreign Missionary Society, the Protestant Episcopal Church. From the Greek word episkopos, which means an overseer, and it's the Greek word that is translated as bishop. You can kind of see it a little bit in the English word bishop, episkopos. It comes from that word in Greek. So we couldn't exactly get our first bishop through sort of this line of bishops going back to the early church through English channels. So we had to get our first bishop, we had to get him from Scotland, and we had to be consecrated the first bishop in Scotland. That's why we have the Cross of St. Andrew here. So the Cross of St. Andrew makes up part of the Episcopal shield, or the Episcopal flag. You also see it right there. And that's because our first bishop had to be consecrated by what were called continuing Anglicans in Scotland. And then we have, of course, the flag of England, not the UK, it wasn't that, but the flag of England, a St. George cross forms it. So this is a hearkening to both the English and the Scottish origins of the Episcopal Church. And that's where we got this shield. So at its best, the Episcopal Church in this Anglican tradition has always upheld this middle way, listening to the Spirit and discerning a balance, I think, between tradition and social progress. Again, this all started back in England in something that was called the Elizabethan settlement, because as reform spread across Europe, it was spreading from a couple of different directions. You know, there were Lutherans, there were Calvinists, there were radical reformers who wanted to get rid of the sacraments. You know, there were all kinds of religious fervor going on. And the Church of England, in order to preserve the nation of England and not descend again into civil war, comes up with this Elizabethan settlement, this idea that there would be a middle ground, and that largely Anglicans then would always be defined by the prayer book. So this is the thing, right? If ultimately you're trying to figure out what distinguishes Episcopalians or Anglicans from other types of Christians, it's sitting right in front of you. It's the Book of Common Prayer. First published in 1549 by Thomas Cranmer. And the idea is that we would pray together as Anglicans and that our prayers would shape the way that we believe. And this is different from what the Calvinists and even the Lutherans decided to do. The Calvinists and the Lutherans in the 16th and 17th centuries were crazy about confessions. Oh, they loved confessions, the Westminster Confession, and they would issue all these different confessions of faith, and they were just a list of everything that they believed and everything that they didn't believe. And so they were called confessional churches. And to belong to those churches, you had to believe in what they confessed to be the truth of the gospel. Anglicans have never been a confessing church. They've never been that type of church. They've been a church that's shaped by prayer. And so we're not a confessional church. We don't have a list of things. We did for a while called the 39 Articles. That's a whole other can of worms. But largely, we have been defined by corporate prayer. And using the Book of Common Prayer was meant from the beginning to bring together people from differing perspectives and differing opinions into the same space. Because it is really hard to hate the people that you pray with. Right? I mean, it's not impossible. But thank God it's a little bit harder to do when you're praying together. And the idea then was of common prayer. So another feature, obviously, of the Book of Common Prayer is that it would be written in English, the vernacular, the language of the people. That is something that's quite Protestant about our church. You know, our churches have some Catholic elements. It has Protestant elements as well. But something very Protestant is that from the beginning we said worship needs to be in the language of the people. It needs to be understood by the people. So the first liturgies are written in English by a person named Thomas Cranmer. He publishes the first prayer book in 1549. The prayer book gets revised based on who the monarch is and based on how things are going, where they're swinging, sort of theologically, in the very tumultuous time in the 16th and 17th centuries. But eventually the prayer book sort of settles in 1662. And that becomes the Book of Common Prayer. And in England, in the Church of England, it is still the official Book of Common Prayer. They have other sort of worship aids, other supplementary books that they use often in worship. And you'll find in England that you can go to a prayer book parish. And that means they actually use the 1662 Book of Common Prayer, not some of those more modern supplementary liturgical materials. So, we gather, we pray together, and the idea is that our prayer shapes our belief, not the other way around as it is in the confessional churches, where they say you have to believe a certain way when you come in the door, and then you have to pray that way. So no, our prayer will actually shape our belief, our gathering together, our repetition, the things that we do will shape the way that we believe. And so throughout the history of the Episcopal Church, there has been this balance between a tradition. We are a deeply traditional church in many ways. And yet we have found ways to innovate. We have found ways to keep things modern and contemporary in many ways. We have integrated social progress into the way that we talk about our faith and the way we live it out, and in our liturgies as well. So again, often in the Episcopal Church, we strive for a both and rather than an either or. Are you conservative or liberal? Well, we're pretty liberal in social progress. We're actually pretty conservative in the fact that we use a prayer book and we have traditions, right? And we do things the same way, more or less, that they've been done for hundreds and hundreds of years in the church. So there's a balance that the church has continued to strike, not always perfectly. Another way you know that we're a Protestant church is that we say we're imperfect, and that our leaders are imperfect, and that we strive to be more Christ-like in every generation, but at times we fall short. So this is the evolution of the American Book of Common Prayer. So there was one in 1789 when the nation was new. The Book of Common Prayer administrated the sacraments and other rites and ceremonies of the church according to the use of the Protestant Episcopal Church in the United States of America, together with the Psalter. The prayer book has changed a lot since 1789, but in many ways it has not. Again, there's that balance between tradition and progress. So the table of contents, the things that we have contained within the Book of Common Prayer, they're more or less the same. The Book of Common Prayer, one of the reasons it was written by Cranmer is to simplify the number of books that a church had to have. Because in the Roman church, you had a missal, you had an ordinal for ordinations, you had a breviary for the daily office, you had all these different books. And they are all actually contained in the Book of Common Prayer. And we'll talk about what those things are over the next few weeks. Don't worry if you don't know what I'm talking about. It's okay. So there was another updated version. So about 100 years later, the church updates some of the liturgies in the 1892 Book of Common Prayer. And then again in 1928. So the timing here is really interesting, right? They go 100 years without changing anything. And then within 35 years or so, they changed the Book of Common Prayer again. The 28 then is, as you can see, the 79 was not published until 79. So for older folks within the Episcopal Church today, many remember worshiping with the Book of Common Prayer 1928. And remember the old liturgies, and remember, honestly, how different the 79 Book of Common Prayer is. And when it first appeared, it was scandalous. It was so different in a lot of ways. It was so modern. And it really did take a generation, as these things do. It took a generation for people to kind of turn over and get used to the 79 Book of Common Prayer. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the differences in all of these. But you can see the title is the same, going back to 1789. The Book of Common Prayer, Administration of the Sacraments, Other Rites and Ceremonies of the Church, together with the Psalter. We're doing the same thing. We're doing the same thing that we've been doing. We just updated some things. This is from the original preface to the 1789 Book of Common Prayer, and it explains why this Book of Common Prayer exists. When in the course of divine providence, these American states became independent with respect to civil government, their ecclesiastical independence was necessarily included, and the different religious denominations of Christians in these states were left at full and equal liberty to model and organize their respective churches and forms of worship and discipline in such manner as they might judge most convenient for their future prosperity, consistently with the Constitution and laws of their country. Basically saying what? We have religious freedom now. The churches are free to organize themselves in whatever way works for them. We don't have to pray for King George III anymore, mainly. in which it will also appear that this church is far from intending to depart from the Church of England in any essential point of doctrine, discipline, or worship, or farther than local circumstances require. So that's a clear statement of, we want continuity with the liturgy and the traditions of the Church of England. Again, the continuity is stressed here, but you have these local circumstances, which is always a hallmark of Anglican theology and practice. We're going to adapt things to the local circumstances. There's a website that I can share with you later that collects all the different books of common prayer from around the world, because the sun once never set on the British Empire, so there is Anglicanism all over the world. Problematic, yes. As I said, we have not been a perfect church. But what is fascinating about the expression of Anglicanism is that it really is a local expression. You will find in different parts of the world a different way of being Anglican in terms of worship that also will ring very true to you at the same time. Right? There's a remarkable degree of consistency, even though you'll find some differences. It's really fun, at least for people like me, to go on this website and to look at all the different local expressions of the Book of Common Prayer. And many of them have not been translated into English, right? So they're in other languages as well, which is really fascinating. You have Anglican worship, but it's not in English. There you go. The table at the communion time. Oh, yeah. So I show you this and a couple of the next slides to show you, in some sense, how different the worship actually looked in the original Episcopal Church. Following again on the heels of the Church of England. The Church of England, from its inception in sort of the Elizabethan settlement in 1662, all the way up until the 1830s, was super Protestant in the way that they approached furnishings, decorations, vestments, the things that the clergy wore. The clergy were not referred to as priests. They were not called father. That's all pretty new and part of the Oxford movement later on in the Episcopal Church. So this is what worship looked like in 1789. The table at communion time having a fair white linen cloth upon it shall stand in the body of the church or in the chancel. So it could be here, in other words. It could be up there. And the minister standing at the north side of the table. Now that's liturgical north. Hang on. Churches are always supposed to face east. Okay, so in terms of architecture, if you look at Google Maps and you're sort of hovering over, let's say, a lot of churches in Europe, you'll notice that they face east. So the idea was facing symbolically the direction of resurrection and new life. Also, at least in the Western Hemisphere, facing Jerusalem as well. So this is called liturgical east. So whether or not we're facing east, cardinal direction, doesn't matter. In the church, any church that you walk into, that's east. Okay? And so then the north end would be this over here, south end and the west end. Okay? So I'll show you what this looks like in a moment. Or where morning and evening prayer are appointed to be said, shall say the Lord's Prayer and the collect following the people kneeling, but the Lord's Prayer may be omitted if morning prayer hath been said immediately before, yada, yada, yada. Okay. This is, I know, a really, really grainy image. The technology back then, in terms of computers, was really bad. Yeah. Thank you, Kathy. But you can see the minister right here standing at the north end of the altar. So this is where the minister would stand. Not behind the altar, not in front of the altar, but at this side of the altar, called the north end. It was meant to be, again, a very simple communion service. There would have been no grand gestures, as you see me doing on a Sunday morning. It just would have been a simple memorial communion of bread and wine. Okay. It is much more flexible in its use, and there is a marked tendency to shorten the regular services, especially those of morning and evening prayer. This is talking about the evolution then to the next prayer book. And you can see that one way in which the church evolves is to meet people where they are in terms of their attention span. And so one of the things they did was to shorten those services so that they would be a little bit more well attended and well regarded as well. Not until 1979 was Holy Eucharist a normative Sunday service. So for hundreds of years in the Church of England and then also in the Episcopal Church, the normal service was morning prayer, and you would have had communion once a month. So that's the way the 1928 prayer book sort of assumes that you're going to do things. There were a lot of changes with the 79, and one of the main changes was making Eucharist, Holy Eucharist, the main service of the church. I'm getting ahead of myself. We'll get there momentarily. These are some of the differences between that very first American prayer book and the next one. For example, in the Great Litany, O holy, blessed, and glorious Trinity, three persons in one God, have mercy upon us miserable sinners, goes to, O holy, blessed, and glorious Trinity, one God, have mercy upon us. All right. So some of the edge is taken off of that earlier language. Though again, language is always in flux. It's always changing. This is one of the reasons why it's important to continue to update our liturgies. Because back then, miserable did not mean what we think of now, right? If someone is miserable now, the connotation is what? What does it mean? Sad. That they're sad. They're depressed. Miserable comes from the Latin word misericordia, which means mercy. And so a miserable sinner was someone in need of mercy. Right? That was what the word literally meant. Not, again, as we think today, I'm just a worm, I'm just a terrible person. Why would I want to say that I'm a miserable sinner? And I get that. But originally, the intent was to say, I'm someone in need of help. I'm pitiable, might be a good synonym for it. Right? Someone who is in need of mercy. Oh boy, yeah, this was from the Good Friday service. Have mercy upon all Jews, Turks, infidels, and heretics. Little spicy. Take from them all ignorance, hardness of heart, and contempt of thy word, and so fetch them home, blessed Lord, to thy flock, that they may be saved among the remnant of true Israelites, and be made one fold under one shepherd. Obviously, we don't pray this way anymore, right? Our understanding of how we are related to folks from different faith traditions has evolved and changed over time, and so we don't pray this. In medieval Europe, in particular, the Good Friday liturgy was so anti-Semitic that Christians would sort of go off, and beat up Jews after the Good Friday service, saying, you Christ killers, and that kind of thing. It's a terrible, terrible legacy of the church, this level of anti-Semitism. And in the Episcopal Church, over the last 10 years, we've actually developed a new Good Friday liturgy that more accurately reflects the understanding that we now have of the different forces that all collaborate in terms of the crucifixion of Christ. More to come on that. Okay, so between the 28 and the 79 prayer book, there is a fascinating thing that happens in the 1950s and 1960s. It's called the liturgical movement. And it's ecumenical. That means that it is something that Roman Catholics and Protestants, Lutherans, Presbyterians, a lot of different denominations are all getting involved in. For the Roman Catholics, the liturgical movement issues in Vatican II. That happens in 1962 and lasts to 1965. Vatican II, I know we have some former Roman Catholics in the house. I won't ask you to identify yourselves, but we can tell. But Vatican II is why in Roman Catholic churches today there's no altar rail. This is why Roman Catholics generally do not kneel to receive communion anymore. It's why many Roman Catholics, just sort of go up in procession and receive communion standing up, for example. And there were many other liturgical innovations that came out of Vatican II. It's also why the priest is not doing this, but has turned toward the people. Okay, this was called ad orientem, which in Latin means facing east. Remember, liturgical east, right? So the priests would be facing east, they would be all praying together, but you would only see the back of the priest. And then at Vatican II, turned around, face the people, versus populum instead of ad orientem. But the biggest difference, of course, is that the Mass was allowed to be said in the vernacular. So you could have an English Mass, you could have a French Mass, you could have a Spanish Mass. None of that was true before 1962 in the Catholic Church. So again, if you speak to Catholics who grew up in the 1950s, they remember the Latin Mass, which has been coming back. Yes, Jean? Yes, and the covering of the heads, both in the Catholic and in the Episcopal Church. That is correct. Only for females, of course. Yeah. Per Paul's instruction in Timothy. Yeah. So the Episcopal Church picks up on liturgical reform and the liturgical movement and has their own set of conversations. But of course, we're not Roman Catholics, so we can't just gather for 3 years and sort of do what they did in Vatican II and have this worldwide council. It took us a lot longer to come up with our liturgical reforms, so about 15 to 17 years longer. But in large part, I mean, we would not have the 79 Book of Common Prayer if it were not for Vatican II. It opened the door to understanding and thinking about our liturgy in a different way, because many Episcopal churches are built this way as well. In fact, some of them, the altar is literally against the wall and you can't move it. And so that's one of the changes that happened in the 79 prayer book as well. The priest was facing the people. So they had all these books called prayer book studies. So we went through various iterations of these studies, and there were certain churches throughout the country that were selected to be trial use for some of these liturgies. So the priest would try them out on the people. They would gather data and try to figure out, how people were reacting to some of these changes. And over those 15 years or so, they came up with the materials eventually to publish the 1979 Book of Common Prayer, which again, the main difference and emphasis was that at Holy Baptism, you have full membership in the body of Christ. So again, previous to this, under the 1928 prayer book, for example, you could not receive Holy Communion unless you were confirmed. So not just baptized, but actually confirmed in the Episcopal Church. So no children, in other words, would have ever received Holy Communion in the Episcopal Church. The age of confirmation generally was 16 years old, 14 to 16. So you wouldn't have received communion at all as a child. When they were designing the 79 prayer book, they said, well, wait a minute. If you're baptized, and our baptismal liturgy says you are a full member of the body of Christ upon baptism, why would you not also be able to receive communion? And so what happens is a shift, right? So the normative service becomes Holy Eucharist, and then it's emphasized in the 79 prayer book that you are fully a member of the body of Christ upon baptism, and that therefore children can receive really whenever their parents deem that it's appropriate for them to do so. So as infants, 3 years old, whatever the parent decides, that's up to them, but that baptism confers full membership in the body of Christ. You might be thinking, well, what about confirmation? What is confirmation, by the way? Anybody know what confirmation is? It's a thing that teenagers do, right? Both in the Roman Catholic and in the Episcopal Church. Methodists do it as well. Other Protestants do it. And the idea is that, sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
Well, isn't the idea that if you were baptized as an infant, you are now taking faith on as your own?
Yes. So it is meant to be the expression of a mature faith, right? So that you're baptized as an infant, the vows that are made for you at baptism are made on your behalf. If you're an infant, obviously you're not making the vows yourself. Someone else is making them for you, your parents and your godparents. So confirmation was really designed as a way for older, more mature Christians to be able to say, this is my faith now, like I accept it as my own, okay? And we have confirmation classes and those sorts of things. The Episcopal Church almost got rid of confirmation at this point. It failed by one vote. And it failed in the House of Bishops because the bishops said, we still need something to do when we show up to churches. Because in our church, only the bishop can confirm. This is not true. In the Roman Catholic Church, the priest is allowed to confirm. But in the Episcopal Church, we decided that the bishops would be the ones who had the power, the authority to confirm. And the reason for that is that basically in the Episcopal Church, confirmation, as my seminary professor put it, is a rite in search of a theology. You know, we do it, but no one really understands why we do it. And since we have a full and robust baptismal ecclesiology, why would we even need confirmation? Now, we've come, again, since 79, I think we've begun to build up that theology of confirmation. And for the large part, confirmation works really well because we capture our teenagers around that time that they're asking really good questions about faith. And when it works well, the idea is that they ask those questions and they engage, and then they are confirmed into the church. The old joke is that they then disappear for the rest of their lives. It's not very funny, but the idea is that, you know, you just sort of get the thing done and then you're out. We hope and trust that we're continuing to develop confirmation in a way that doesn't have that effect. Holy Eucharist, again, becomes the normative Sunday service. So this is something that changes as well in the 79 prayer book. So that we have Eucharist pretty much every time we gather, and if we don't, then people are like, hey, Father, why didn't we have communion, right? Because again, that's the thing that we do on a regular basis now. There were other changes as well. I'll go back for just a moment. Again, if you wore something like this in the Church of England, you would have literally been jailed at various points in the church's history. These vestments are Catholic, okay? And so, again, the typical vestment for a country parson, would have been maybe a cassock, but really just a suit. The clerical collar was not invented by Roman Catholics. It was actually invented by a Protestant. But it grew out of the fashion in the 18th century where you sort of have like that white cravat thing, and then you had like an overcoat. And so that's what this is supposed to resemble and to look like. So these are all fairly new developments. So clerical collars are actually quite new development to sort of mark someone as a priest. In the Roman Church, priests just would have worn a cassock. So the big black robe, that would have been the marker of a priest. At various times in the Church of England's history, having candles on the altar was punishable by imprisonment and or fines. So again, because these were regarded as elements of popery, Roman Catholicism were creeping into the Church of England, and we didn't want that to happen. In the 1830s, a man named John Henry Newman really changed all of that. He was an Anglican clergy person, and in his studies, he became convinced of the truth of Roman Catholicism, and he converted to Roman Catholicism. And this was literally something that everyone in England was talking about. I mean, it was huge. It was just a huge cultural moment where you had a very prominent Church of England priest and theologian and teacher at Oxford converted to Roman Catholicism. And what people were afraid of actually happened, is that a lot of young men followed him into the Roman Catholic Church. Remember, Roman Catholicism had only been legalized in England a little while before John Henry Newman actually converted in the 1830s. It had been outlawed for a long time. But Newman, because he was at Oxford, started something called the Oxford Movement. And initially, Newman didn't convert, actually. Initially, he just said, I want Anglicanism to rediscover its Catholic roots. And so he spent many years along those lines, and he gathered this Anglo-Catholic movement around him of people who thought there were some good things that the Church of England needed to recover from their Roman Catholic roots. Eventually, Newman did convert. Eventually, he was made a cardinal in the Catholic Church. He is now Saint John Henry Newman. This is a fairly recent development in the Catholic Church. And he's now been named one of the doctors of the church, which I think there are still under 40. 40 under 40, no. There are 40 or so doctors of the church. So it's like a really important official title. So there was so much fear. I know it's hard for us to imagine because we don't think of this as really a big deal, but there was so much fear that if even folks in the Episcopal Church started dressing this way, that we would then start believing and teaching and being more Catholic than people were comfortable with. A lot of that has changed, obviously. And so in most parishes in the Episcopal Church today, you will see similar types of vestments. These are indeed pretty high church vestments. So the celebrant has a cope on, which is a fancy cape. And these folks who are assisting have on dalmatics. So that's a deacon's vestment. I actually know this person. I didn't even realize that when I threw up the image. Anyway. This is Michael Curry, our former presiding bishop. And so you can see, again, he's in a chasuble, which is the garment that Ms. Hubengardner designed, that I wear each week. This is a deacon's stole. The lace, again, scandalous. Just way too far, would have been a really big deal. Okay. So because we grew out of the American Revolution and the time when America was writing its own founding documents, the Episcopal Church, in terms of the way that it's governed, actually looks a lot like the way the United States is governed. We have a bicameral legislature. Everybody loves a good bicameral legislature. We have two chambers, in other words, two houses. So just like we have the House of Representatives and the Senate in the U.S. government, we have the House of Bishops and we have the House of Deputies. So the House of Bishops is made up of... Oh, yeah. And the House of Deputies is made up of clergy and lay people. And so every 3 years, we have a general convention. That convention gathers, and it is the official decision-making body of the Episcopal Church. General convention. So, for example, if there are any differences in the prayer book, they go before general convention. And they have to be voted on positively at one general convention and then ratified again at the next general convention. So they have built into the Episcopal Church governance some of that slowness that originally we also built into the U.S. government, an effort to be more deliberative and careful when we make changes. For example, the 2 additional marriage rights that are gender neutral, that were written intending to allow us to do marriages in the Episcopal Church for folks of any gender, those are still not prayer book status, but they will be next year when we go to General Convention, and those will be ratified for the second time. But so it takes a lot, in other words, to modify the Book of Common Prayer. But the bicameral legislature handles all kinds of things, General Convention. It's, by the way, for this reason that we have a presiding bishop and not an archbishop. So again, in Roman Catholicism, you have bishops, you have priests, you have bishops, and then you have archbishops, right? And they're the ones who rule over the bishops. And then you have cardinals, and you have a whole hierarchy. In the Episcopal Church, we simply have a presiding bishop, and they are not like an archbishop or a pope. They do not have really any power. They are figureheads. They do a lot of PR for the Episcopal Church. They issue official statements. They kind of gather us and help us think through current events theologically with regard to our Anglican theology and practice. But they don't really have any real power. What the presiding bishop does essentially is to run the national church offices, which are in New York City. So they have an executive council, they run the national church offices, and basically they just exist to help support the various dioceses of the church. That's what they do. It's not that they're unimportant. Presiding Bishop Michael Curry did a great deal for our church. He was vocal, he's an excellent preacher. He got us to think and talk about our faith in more heartfelt and intimate ways. And so, he did a great deal of good for the church. But even the presiding bishop can't just call another bishop and tell them what to do. You can reach out to another bishop, right? in brotherly or sisterly love and say, I really think that we need to reconsider this or to do this, but doesn't have the power to just sort of decide things by fiat. So we have a diocese. Our diocese is the Diocese of Michigan. Again, the diocese is basically a way of organizing the church under the head of one diocesan bishop. The bishop is the episkopos, the overseer. The bishop is really, so when you take your ordination vows, for example, it's very medieval. You sort of pledge an oath of fealty to your bishop. You say, I will obey you. Yeah. So obedience is part of the vows of a priest. So if Bishop Bonnie Perry asks me to do something, I really can't say no. And she is the chief pastor of the diocese. And so this is the landscape of how this looks today. The Diocese of the Episcopal Church, some of them have been struggling a lot financially in recent years. And so there have been mergers where there were previously maybe 2 or 3 dioceses in a state. They've been merged into one. So that recently happened in Wisconsin. There were several different dioceses. There used to be a Diocese of Eastern and Western Michigan. They've been united into the Diocese of the Great Lakes. And then, of course, you can see Michigan. Here's a little cutout for Lansing and East Lansing right here. But it's basically Detroit and Ann Arbor and Lansing sort of in an upside-down triangle. So that's our diocese. The diocese essentially functions, again, to equip the parishes, right? So the national church functions to equip the diocese, and then the diocese exists to help function and help the parishes at the parish level. And so that's a bit about our governance. For me, as a priest, the highest ecclesiastical authority that I have is the Bishop of Michigan. So it doesn't go any higher than that. A bishop from another diocese can't tell me what to do. The presiding bishop can't tell me what to do. But again, Bishop Bonnie Perry can. Okay. So that's a little bit about how this works. I will tell you very briefly, and we're almost out of time. The Diocese of Michigan, under Bishop Bonnie Perry's leadership, has identified 3 main priorities. So they are financial stability. And one of the things that the Diocese of Michigan has been really helping parishes to do is to ensure that legacy gifts are, that people know that they exist, that it is possible to leave a legacy gift to a parish, and that often helps that parish with an endowment that can then fund things for years and years and years to come. So financial stability, stewardship, transfer of wealth, that's one focus. Another is public witness. So Bishop Bonnie wants to help with community organizing and has obviously had a focus, as has been the case here at All Saints, on racial justice reparations and racial reconciliation. Part of Bishop Bonnie's public witness is also end gun violence in Michigan, which is something that she's very heavily involved with and shared really powerful testimony with us at convention over the last day or two for that. So again, public witness, Bishop Bonnie reiterates, it's not political speech. It is speech that flows from the heart of who we are as Anglican Christians, from our theology and our practice. It has profound implications for politics, absolutely. But it is not so-called political speech. It's public witness. We are witnessing to the values of Christ and how they show up in the world around us. And then congregational vitality. So this has been the emphasis in the Episcopal Church for some time now, which is identifying the gifts that, let's say, even small parishes have. Because the average Sunday attendance in the Episcopal Church now nationwide is 37. The church has indeed been shrinking. This has been, you can see this coming a long way off over the last 30 years or so. And it's not just the Episcopal Church. Churches across the board have found this to be the case, and certainly COVID did not help in this regard. And so the emphasis is, let's take that congregation of 27 brave souls who come every single Sunday and are dedicated to their faith and to changing the world around them in the name of Christ. And if that's a vital congregation, we're going to pour our resources into it. We're going to enable it to thrive and to continue, such that the measure of success is not size, but vitality. You can have a large church that is not alive spiritually, and you can have a very small church that is. So we actually have someone who works in the diocesan office now, a missioner, and his job is just to visit. Most of the parishes in our diocese are quite small, to visit those parishes and to equip them and enable them to live out their mission with the resources that they have. It's really a good thing. Forming and nurturing young people. So we have Carmen Piggins, who works in the diocesan office and is fantastic. She's also involved with End Gun Violence Michigan, but she's our young person missioner, and she does really good work. Creating, forming, and nurturing lay and ordained leaders, and then congregational development. So something that I'm actually required to do per my letter of agreement, which is what you call a contract for a clergy person, is to bring a team from All Saints at some point in the next 3 years to the College for Congregational Vitality, which is something that the diocese runs, and that helps both lay people and clergy understand at a deeper level what are some ways in which we can feed our congregation, we can enable it to continue to be a healthy and spiritually vital place. 5 minutes. Questions, thoughts, comments? Yeah.
I have a few, but
yeah.
I'll just keep the 1979 prayer book. If I were to go to the UK, how similar would it be to their existing prayer book? Did they coordinate at all, or are they completely?
They did. So the UK has something called Common Worship now, and it's a little booklet. And so if the parish uses Common Worship, it's going to be very similar to the 79 BCP, almost word for word.
Okay.
If it's a prayer book parish, they're going to use the 1662, and it's going to be very different. Yeah. I should say the order of service won't be that different, but the language certainly will. Yeah. Yeah.
Is there talk about another prayer book in the next 10 years?
There certainly has been a lot of talk about a new prayer book. Yeah. And I think where the church as a whole has landed is that we're probably never going to produce another physical prayer book ever again. I think what we will do is the model that England and the church actually in New Zealand has taken on as well, which is to explore supplementary materials that then gain prayer book status, just as the additional rites for marriage have. We're not going to print a new prayer book and include those rites in it. But again, most parishes do what we're doing, which is to publish the entire order of service and give it to parishioners as they walk in. I don't, I have my own order that I'm using as well, that it's a printout. And so we're probably not going to ever produce physical prayer books again. We'll just continue to update supplementary materials, make them available to parishes so that they can produce their bulletins, and so on and so forth. Yeah.
So where do these supplemental, where does it look like, for example, gay marriage?
Yes. Yeah.
Where is that housed? Is it in the cloud or?
Yes, it is essentially in the cloud, Joe. Yeah. It's a terribly complicated and convoluted process. But there are websites that you can get to fairly easily through the Episcopal Church National website, and it has the liturgical resources, and you can find them pretty easily. And for example, for the additional marriage rites, there's a whole beautifully done document. It's like 70 pages called I Will Bless You and You Will Be a Blessing, and from Ruth, and it gives a whole explanation of the process by which we have come up with those additional rites. And it's really done quite well. Yeah. Yeah. Anything else? Yes?
So exactly when did we get so Catholic with the vestments and the candles and the smells and bells?
Yeah. So it certainly came over from the Oxford movement to here in the States, right? In the end of the 19th century. Yeah. But I would say still, it probably didn't happen fully in the Episcopal Church until the 1950s. The cassock albs, the white garments that we wear, those were kind of designed and made up in the 70s. They never existed as church garments, liturgical robes before then. And they were meant to combine the two vestments, a cassock and an alb, into the cassock alb. But
in the Church of England, they were black and white.
yes,
The
yeah.
people would wear the black and
Yes.
that was it.
Yeah, a cassock and then a surplice
Yeah, that was
on top. And then a stole perhaps as well. Yeah, yeah. That's why so many cassock albs look like they are discarded props from Star Trek. Because they were designed in the 1970s, and some parishes still have the original ones from the 1970s. And yeah, that's right. Yeah, but it was meant to simplify things for clergy and lay people in terms of the things that they would wear. Yeah. All right, wonderful. There are some cupcakes right here. They're individually packaged, and I think they're available for consumption. All right, thank you all. We'll see you next week.